Hey, good afternoon, scholars. Welcome to your Tuesday sixth grade Vista Virtual Literature class. I'm really excited for today's lesson. I think it's really going to push some of your thinking and might even inspire a couple of you, no joke, to study law when you go to college. There's even some killer programs at some of the Phoenix high schools that will kind of like pre-law and can kind of set you up for that. And I really think today's lesson might be powerful enough to send some of you in that direction. I also have some good things to celebrate in terms of the number of students that are doing their best and turning in their work every day. We had a 7% tick up from yesterday, um, and that's great. It's really good to see the effort that most sixth graders are putting into these lessons. I've got three different students' works that I want to give specific shout outs today. The first one is Daylin's. Remember yesterday's prompt, you had to argue whether the third juror or the 10th juror was the bigger antagonist in the story. And we had some different opinions and some different reasons behind those opinions, but three students really jumped out to me. Daylin said, I think that the 10th juror is the bigger antagonist because he speaks what he would like to say, but what he says are mean words, and he is racist to Puerto Ricans. He yells at everyone, and that's the reason he thinks the boy is guilty. For example, it said, these people are born to lie. They don't know what the truth is. They are different. They think different. They act different. They don't need to have excuse to kill someone. They get drunk with wine or something cheap like that. And the 10th bosses them around a lot. He yells at them and tries to prove his point that they're bad people, but nobody believes him. One thing I encourage you students to do yesterday is not only to prove why the juror you picked is the main antagonist, but also quickly hit on why you think the other is not. Daylin took that challenge, and here's how she responded. The third juror is innocent. She really gives the third juror a pass. The third juror is innocent, and he is going through a hard time with the son running away, and he's putting the blame of the other kid, but he sees that revenge is bad. He is emotionally stressed and can't handle this hard time. This proves 10th juror is the 10th juror is the bigger antagonist. Um, so Daylin was very sympathetic to the third juror's struggles as a father, which shows kind of what a kind person she is. Um, One thing I want to point out to Daylin and also to a lot of students who approach their work with enthusiasm and with passion. I can see this was Daylin's thinking, and she was just getting it all out there, like it was a conversation. When she did that, when she wrote like that, and this happens a lot. You can see when a student's really passionate about what they're writing, and they're just going. We forget to separate our sentences. It's just kind of like the words just kind of flow, and we forget to break up the different ideas that are coming out of our heads. So real quick, it's always a good idea to get your thoughts out, but then go back into your writing and see how if the punctuation is there, because that's going to make it easier for an outsider to understand your thinking and to be on the same page. So just a quick example of the first couple sentences of where we can go in and separate the different ideas that are connected but are different, so they need periods. I think that the 10th juror is the bigger antagonist because he speaks what he would like to say, but comma, always comma before but, always. But what he says are mean words, and he is racist to Puerto Ricans. I think that can be one sentence, right? So actually, no. Let's just break this up into sentences. All right, but all he uses mean words. That's an idea. I'm gonna replace and with also. Also, he is racist to Puerto Ricans. That's an idea. He yells at everyone, and that's the reason that he thinks the boy is guilty. That's an idea, right? They're connected, but they're different, so they need periods. And so then you just go back in and you just capitalize the next word or add a transition word. But just make sure when you're flowing and you're really excited about your answer and you know exactly what you want to say, make sure you take the time to go back and proofread. Okay, but um, great writing, Daylin. Way to accept my challenge to acknowledge the count. That's called a counterpoint. So what someone else might argue. Way to acknowledge the counterpoint and then bring it back to what you want to prove. Let's look at another one. This one is Raina G. She has a different opinion than than Daylin. She said the third juror is the bigger antagonist because he uses his personal bias to try to prove that he is guilty. Real quick there, it said he uses his personal bias to prove that he is guilty. This is an example of a vague pronoun, which I'm going to do a real quick mini lesson on in a second. So actually, this is a good time to do it. Let's Before we actually dive into Raina's example, let's do a reminder of vague pronouns. Let's do a quick skill review, right? So I've got the same scenario written three different ways. The first one has no pronouns. Brian and Alex were playing catch. Alex kept dropping the ball. Alex said it was because Brian was throwing too hard. Brian didn't believe Alex. Is that clear? Yes. But it's also repetitive, right? Brian, Alex, Brian, Alex, Brian, Alex. It gets repetitive. So we use pronouns so we don't have to keep repeating ourselves unnecessarily. Problem is, when we use too many pronouns, it starts to get confused about who we're talking about. Which noun are we referring to, right? So the second one is an example of the same scenario, but with vague pronouns. Brian and Alex were playing catch. He kept dropping the ball. Alex said it was because he was throwing too hard, I should say too. He didn't believe him. What is unclear in this second example? It's unclear who's Alex said it was because he was throwing too hard. What's that mean? Does that mean Alex is said because he himself was throwing too hard, or is he saying Brian's throwing too hard? Who is he kept dropping the ball? Who kept dropping the ball? Brian or Alex? He didn't believe him. Who didn't believe who? Right? This is an example of vague pronouns where there we went from using way too many nouns and no pronouns. That got repetitive. Now we're not using enough nouns, and so now it's not clear when we use a pronoun who we're talking about. Let's look at the third example as a nice mix between the two. Brian and Alex were playing catch. Alex kept dropping the ball. He said it was because Brian was throwing too hard. Again, actually, let me. This is bugging me. As the teacher, I need to be on these things. This is an example of me needing to proofread. No, okay, now I can keep teaching now that I have the correct two. Okay, he said it was because Brian was throwing too hard. So who is he? Obviously, it's Alex, right? There's two ways we know it's Alex right here. I used the pronoun he right here. Who am I talking about? You should be able to rewind, kind of go back into the another sentence and see who was the last person I was referring to. It was Alex. So when I use a pronoun he, you should know it's talking about Alex because that was the last noun that came. Also, I know it's Alex because I put in the name Brian afterwards so that I wanted to make it clear it was Alex that was dropping the ball and not Brian. He said it was because Brian was throwing too hard. Brian didn't believe him, right? So this is another example of this was confusing the vague pronoun because he didn't believe him. I wasn't sure who we're talking about, I said Brian didn't believe him, so you know that him would be Alex. I could have also said he didn't believe Alex, right? So that you know they're different people. Make sense? So when you are, um, especially when you're talking about two characters of the same gender, we were talking about two women, and you kept using her and she. Or you're talking about two guys, and you keep using he and him. That's when it can get tricky and our pronouns can get vague. So in the example of Reina's, she's talking about two different um, males. She's talking about the third juror, and she's talking about the boy on trial, and it gets a little bit confusing. I know what Reina is saying because I read the play, but I just want you guys to be careful for vague pronouns because it might pop up today on today's assignment. Okay. All right. Back from the vague pronouns tangent, let's dive back into Reina's answer. The third juror is the biggest antagonist because he uses his personal bias to try to prove the boy is guilty. While the 10th juror is prejudiced towards the boy, here's Reina doing it. Reina's acknowledging the counterpoint too. Um, while the 10th juror is prejudiced towards the boy, the third juror is very angry and takes it out on the other jurors. In the text, it says, quote, "It's these kids, the way they are nowadays. When I was a kid, I used to call my father sir. That's right, sir. Have you ever heard a kid call his father that anymore?" This shows that he is using his personal experience to determine if the boy is guilty or not. The third juror wants the boy to be guilty because of his past experience with the disrespect his son showed him. It makes the third juror think that all teenage boys are like his son. Um, Good, Reina. You throwing in his son right there instead of just saying him is a good way of throwing in a noun and not a pronoun to make it really clear who we're talking about. The third juror isn't being honest with himself or the other jurors. He wants to believe what he knows, and all he knows is that his son was disrespectful, meaning he is judging the boy with his personal bias. Way to wrap it up with that good conclusion, Reina, and way to use our strong academic terms that were introduced to us, like personal bias. We got one more example of a student that crushed it, and it's Joao. Joao's going to also do a really good job acknowledging the counterclaim. I think that the bigger antagonist is the 10th juror, because even though he wasn't the last juror to vote not guilty, he, which is, you're acknowledging the counterclaim that someone could say it's the third juror because he's the last one to flip. I love that thinking, Joao. Even though he isn't the last person to vote not guilty, he caused more of a problem, an argument, by using racism to support his argument. When I saw that the 10th juror was showing his anger by being racist toward the kids, I saw that he was the bigger antagonist because instead of just showing his opinion, he was racist and like talking about them as if they were like somebody who isn't a person. When I realized that the 10th juror thought about people like the boy, I instantly thought he was one of the bigger antagonists because of the disrespect he shows toward people like the boy. This highlights that the 10th juror is one of the bigger antagonists because even though he lasted less time than the third juror, he went beyond disrespectful because of his racism and talking about them as if they were trash. Them being Puerto Ricans, not the other jurors, right? That's another example of a vague pronoun. So we're seeing this pop up in our writing, so I'm glad we're focusing on it today. But Joao, great job explaining your thinking with multiple examples. Great job acknowledging the counterclaim and then really bringing your point home. What I want to push you in your writing is don't talk about yourself. You don't have to say when I saw that the 10th juror. You can just start with the 10th juror, right? It's your writing. You're the authority. You don't have to kind of say I thought. We know it's what you think because this is your writing. If you want to use we, you can use we because you're talking about like the readers. You can speak for the readers of it because you're one of them. Okay, today we're shifting gears. We're going to a video. This is a video of a prosecutor. I want to go over the different types of attorneys. Well, two different types of attorneys that we see in legal cases. One is a prosecutor, and the prosecutor is the attorney who brings charges against a person of accuses of crime and argues their guilt in court. So in 12 Angry Men, the prosecutor was the one who was trying to prove that the boy was guilty. All right. So prosecutors have a lot of power. Not only do they try to prove that you're guilty, but they're the ones who push for a certain charge. So in 12 Angry Men, it was the prosecutor who said, we want to accuse this boy of first-degree murder. Okay, that's the charge we want to prove. And then they try to do it. Okay. The other type of attorney would be the defense attorney. In the boy's case, it was a public defender, because if you can't afford a lawyer, which a lot of people can't because they're crazy expensive, especially a good lawyer, you get a public defender, which is an attorney provided by the state to defend people in court who can't afford a lawyer. So they're the one who are supposed to try to keep you out of jail by proving that you didn't do what it is that the prosecutor is saying that you did. Okay. The lawyer that we're going to hear from right now, his name is Adam Foss, and he is a prosecutor in Boston. And we're going to listen to a talk that he gives called A Prosecutor's Vision for a Better Justice System. Let's look at today's feedback. I want you to put this in to your feedback box before we watch the video. It's two-part. One is a thinking, like just kind of mentality I want you to have going into this, and the other is the skill that we went over. So the main thing I want you to do while we watch this video is to monitor your thinking. Be aware of what you're thinking and feeling and reacting as you watch the video. So monitor your thinking and your interest as you watch. Because whenever I play a video, I like to give you a reflection prompt, just saying like, hey, what was most interesting to you? Or really, what stuck out to you? So while you watch the video, just pay attention to your thinking and your feeling, so that you can answer that question with confidence. Like, what part of the video most stuck with you and why? And then when we're doing our writing, watch out for those vague pronouns, especially when you're talking about two people of the same gender. That's when things can get tricky. And on question number 3, there's an opportunity to talk about two different males when you could use vague pronouns. I want you to be really careful about avoiding vague pronouns by throwing in the nouns close to the pronouns that they're describing so that it's clear who you're talking about. Okay, let's look at our first question that we're looking for. What is Foss proving with his audience survey? And I'll pause at that point. We're going to watch this video together. So I'll pause at that point when it's time to answer it. So here we go. Again, make sure you are paying attention to your own thinking of what's catching your interest.
The following are my opinions and do not reflect the opinions or policies of any particular prosecutor's office. I am a prosecutor. I believe in law and order. I'm the adopted son of a police officer, a Marine, and a hairdresser. I believe in accountability and that we should all be safe in our communities. I love my job and the people that do it. I just think that it's our responsibility to do it better. By a show of hands, how many of you by the age of 25 had either acted up in school, went somewhere you were specifically told to stay out of, or drank alcohol before your legal age? All right. How many of you shoplifted, tried an illegal drug, or got into a physical fight, yes, even with a sibling? Now, how many of you ever spent one day in jail for any of those decisions? How many of you sitting here today think that you are a danger to society or should be defined by those actions of youthful indiscretion? Point taken.
All right, he said point taken, but what was his point? What was he trying to prove just now with that survey, right? He asked them these questions about, you know, doing things that get you in trouble or that are against the law, that are bad, fighting, stealing, drinking, drugs. And what happened when he asked those questions? And what happened when he asked how many people had gone to jail for making those decisions? And what happens when he asked if um, if the audience thought that they were a danger to society because they did those things? What point is he trying to make to his audience? What are they supposed to be thinking about after that survey? Go ahead and answer that right here. What is he proving? What point is he proving when he got so many hands to say we've done these bad things, but so few hands when it came to did you go to jail or do you think that you're dangerous because you did those things? What point is he trying to prove? Pause me, type out your response, and this should be a multiple sentence response, not just one sentence. And again, I hope you paused me to type out your response. If you didn't, pause me, finish. We're going to keep going. Fossil's going to start to talk about why he got into this work. So just pay attention so that you can answer this comprehension question.
When we talk about criminal justice reform, we often focus on a few things, and that's what I want to talk to you about today. But first, since you shared with me, I'm going to give you a confession on my part. I went to law school to make money. I had no interest in being a public servant. I had no interest in the criminal law, and I definitely didn't think that I would ever be a prosecutor. Near the end of my first year of law school, I got an internship in the Roxbury Division of the Boston Municipal Court. I knew of Roxbury as an impoverished neighborhood in Boston, plagued by gun violence and drug crime. My life in my legal career changed the first day of that internship. I walked into a courtroom and I saw an auditorium of people who one by one would approach the front of that courtroom to say two words and two words only, not guilty. They were predominantly black and brown. And then a judge, a defense attorney, and a prosecutor would make life-altering decisions about that person without their input. They were predominantly white. As each person one by one approached the front of that courtroom, I couldn't stop but think, how did they get here? I wanted to know their stories. And as the prosecutor read the facts of each case, I was thinking to myself, we could have predicted that. That seems so preventable. Not because I was an expert in criminal law, but because it was common sense. Over the course of the internship, I began to recognize people in the auditorium, not because they were criminal masterminds, but because they were coming to us for help and we were sending them out without any. My second year of law school, I worked as a paralegal for a defense attorney, and in that experience, I met many young men accused of murder. Even in our worst, I saw human stories, and they all contained childhood trauma, victimization, poverty, loss, disengagement from school, early interaction with the police and the criminal justice system, all leading to a seat in a courtroom. Those convicted of murder were condemned to die in prison, and it was during those meetings with those men that I couldn't fathom why we would spend so much money to keep this one person in jail for the next 80 years when we could have reinvested it up front and perhaps prevented the whole thing from happening in the first place. My third year of law school, I defended people accused of small street crimes, mostly mentally ill, mostly homeless, mostly drug addicted, all in need of help. They would come to us, and we would send them away without that help. They were in need of our assistance, but we weren't giving them any. Prosecuted, adjudged, and defended by people who knew nothing about them. The staggering inefficiency is what drove me to criminal justice work. The unfairness of it all made me want to be a defender. The power dynamic that I came to understand.
Before he gets into this point, just based on his experience of, as a law student, seeing the court, how it worked for the first time, stuff like that, what led him to be a prosecutor? Pause me. He talked about his experience and what drew him to the work. What was it? Just do your best to explain in your own words, multiple sentences, why did he choose this job? All right, if you haven't paused me to finish your response, pause me now, and then we'll keep going when you're done. I want to frame question for number 3. So he's talking about all these things that are unfair, right? These things he thinks get wrong, of people being judged by people who know nothing about them and who don't have the same racial backgrounds as them. You would assume when he sees these people being treated like this and not getting the help they need, things like that, you would assume he would want to sign up to defend them and to be a defense attorney. But instead, he signs up to be a prosecutor, the person whose job it is to accuse them of crimes. Why? Why would he choose to address these problems that he sees by joining the side that charges people with crimes and not the side who defends them when they're charged, right? That's what the prosecutor charges them of crimes. The defense attorney defends them against those charges. So if he feels that the whole system is unfair, why did he choose to become a prosecutor and not a defense attorney? I'm going to rewind it a couple seconds.
They would come to us, and we would send them away without that help. They were in need of our assistance, but we weren't giving them any. Prosecuted, adjudged, and defended by people who knew nothing about them. The staggering inefficiency is what drove me to criminal justice work. The unfairness of it all made me want to be a defender. The power dynamic that I came to understand made me become a prosecutor. I don't want to spend a lot of time talking about the problem. We know that the criminal justice system needs reform. We know that there are 2.3 million people in American jails and prisons, making us the most incarcerated nation on the planet. We know that there's another 7 million people on probation or parole. We know that the criminal justice system disproportionately affects people of color, particularly poor people of color. And we know that there are system failures happening everywhere that bring people to our courtrooms, but what we do not discuss is how ill-equipped our prosecutors are to receive them. When we talk about criminal justice reform, we as a society focus on 3 things. We complain, we tweet, we protest about the police, about sentencing laws, about prison. We rarely, if ever, talk about the prosecutor. In the fall of 2009, a young man was arrested by the Boston Police Department. He was 18 years old.
So why, scholars, why would he choose to become the person who decides the charges rather than the person who defends against the charges? Why does he want to be a prosecutor? Do your best to answer this question. I will clear it up tomorrow to make sure we're clear on it, but go ahead. Why would he choose to be a prosecutor and not a defense attorney? Pause me as you finish typing your response. The last part of the video we're going to watch together, he talks about a specific case he has where, as a prosecutor, a young man made a really bad choice, and he's going to talk about as the prosecutor, all the options he could have done in this young man Christopher, in Christopher's case. So pay close attention to all the different options and the power that Adam Foss had as the prosecutor in Christopher's case, and what these different options would mean for Christopher if Foss went, based on the decision that Foss made about how much trouble Christopher should get in. Okay, so pay attention to the case. What did Christopher do? What were Foss's options as a prosecutor, and what would those options mean for Christopher's future?
Years old, he was African American, and he was a senior at a local public school. He had his sights set on college, but his part-time minimum wage job wasn't providing the financial opportunity he needed to enroll in school. In a series of bad decisions, he stole 30 laptops from the store and sold them on the internet. This led to his arrest and a criminal complaint of 30 felony charges. The potential jail time he faced is what stressed Christopher out the most, but what he had little understanding of was the impact a criminal record would have on his future. I was standing in arraignments that day when Christopher's case came across my desk, and at the risk of sounding dramatic in that moment, I had Christopher's life in my hands. I was 29 years old, a brand new prosecutor, and I had little appreciation for the decisions that I would make would impact Christopher's life. Christopher's case was a serious one and needed to be dealt with as such, but I didn't think that branding him a felon for the rest of his life was the right answer. For the most part, prosecutors step onto their job with little appreciation of the impact of our decisions, regardless of our intent. Despite our broad discretion, we learn to avoid risk at all costs, rendering our discretion basically useless. History has conditioned us to believe that somehow the criminal justice system brings about accountability and improves public safety despite evidence to the contrary. We're judged internally and externally by our convictions and our trial wins, so prosecutors aren't really incentivized to be creative in our case dispositions, or to take risks on people we might not otherwise. We stick to an outdated method, counterproductive to achieving the very goal that we all want, and that's safer communities. Yep, most prosecutors standing in my space would have arraigned Christopher. They have little appreciation for what we can do. Arraigning Christopher would give him a criminal record, making it harder for him to get a job, setting in motion a cycle that defines the failing criminal justice system today. With a criminal record and without a job, Christopher would be unable to find employment, education, or stable housing. Without those protective factors in his life, Christopher would be more likely to commit further, more serious crime. The more contact Christopher had with the criminal justice system, the more likely it would be that he would return again and again and again, all at tremendous social cost to his children, to his family, and to his peers. And ladies and gentlemen, it is a terrible public safety outcome for the rest of us. When I came out of law school, I did the same thing as everybody else. I came out as a prosecutor, expected to do justice, but I never learned what justice was in my classes. None of us do. None of us do. And yet, prosecutors are the most powerful actors in the criminal justice system. Our power is virtually boundless. In most cases, not the judge, not the police, not the legislature, not the mayor, not the governor, not the president can tell us how to prosecute our cases. The decision to arraign Christopher and give him a criminal record was exclusively mine. I would choose whether to prosecute him for 30 felonies, for 1 felony, for a misdemeanor, or at all. I would choose whether to leverage Christopher into a plea deal or to take the case to trial, and ultimately, I would be in a position to ask for Christopher to go to jail.
All right, he went over the options kind of fast.
These are decisions that prosecutors make every day, unfettered.
He went over them kind of fast, so I encourage you to rewind and rewatch and take note of all the different options that he had. As he goes over all the different options and the power that he had as the
And we are unaware and
as he went over all the options he had as the power of attorney, that also might help you answer number 3 of why he chose to become a prosecutor and not a defense attorney. So rewatch that if you need. What are all the different options that he had over Christopher's case, and what would those options mean for Christopher if he took them? Once you've answered that question, I can't wait to see something from this clip that made you think. Discuss something from this clip that made you think. What was it? What are your thoughts? All right. I really want to know what you guys are thinking as you watch this video. I know that when I watched this video for the first time last week, I learned a lot, and I was like, man, I didn't know this. And I mean it what I said in the assignment description today. I said you're going to learn a ton of really interesting facts about our legal system and how it could be better for all. I'm so excited to dive into this video with you. I think it may inspire a few of you to pursue legal careers. So I'm really curious to see what your takeaways from this first part of the video are, and we'll finish it tomorrow, and we'll start to apply uh, this attorney's ideas to the case in 12 Angry Men and ask ourselves, how might have 12 Angry Men been different if the prosecutor was different? All right. Can't wait to see you guys' work and reflections. I will see you tomorrow, and um, just give this your best effort. I really want to see your thinking. Bye, guys.